Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Games I've Wanted to Play, the series in which I dig through the treasure trove that is gaming's history and bring to you a game that I've always wanted to check out. For today's episode we are going to be looking at Panzer Dragoon Saga. Released back in 1998 for the Sega Saturn, Panzer Dragoon Saga is perhaps best known nowadays for being ludicrously expensive in the second-hand market, with, at the last time of checking, copies going for upwards of £600 to £700. It is also, however, supposed to be an absolutely fantastic game in its own right, and as a fan of JRPGs, it's one that has been on my radar for quite some time. So what exactly is it? Well, Panzer Dragoon Saga is the third in the Panzer Dragoon series. It's a sequel to Panzer Dragoon and Panzer Dragoon Saga. They're both rail shooters, and they're generally touted as two must-play titles for the Sega Saturn. But in a change of direction, Panzer Dragoon Saga is a fully fledged RPG instead of going back to that rail shooter format. You see, back in 1995, Sega felt that in order to compete with Sony's PlayStation and the upcoming Final Fantasy titles for it, they needed their own powerhouse RPG. So Team Andromeda were charged with making Panzer Dragoon Saga, which went into development around the same time as the second Panzer Dragoons game. It had something of a troubled development, but it would eventually release in 1998. Team Andromeda wanted to push the Saturn to its very limits, which, made the development cycle quite long for that sort of era. It was one of the first RPGs of that time to feature full 3D environments on a console, as well as full voice acting. And when it did release, it received pretty much universal acclaim, with outlets touting it as one of the best, if not the best title on the Saturn, and in some cases one of the best releases of that year, which, if you look at how stacked 1998 actually was, that is incredibly high praise. But there was one slight problem. You see, by 1998, Sega had all but given up on the Sega Saturn. It had failed to really make any impact, and the market was by then dominated by Sony's PlayStation, and the N64 was, doing incredibly well too. So Sega's attention was put on the upcoming Dreamcast console, which was set to launch later that year in Japan, and in the rest of the world the following year. So despite this critical acclaim, Sega didn't actually do as much as they could to promote the game, especially in the Western markets, so it meant that it sold incredibly low. It was also kind of seen as a little bit different, I guess, to what many people would expect from a JRPG, so it was said that that didn't help matters either. But, you see, while Final Fantasy VII, which had released the previous year, sold in its millions, Panzer Dragoon Saga struggled to hit 100,000 in its native Japan, and Sega barely produced any copies of it for the West, with numbers as low as 30,000 copies for the West being cited. So, almost immediately you see one contributing factor as to why the game fetches so much on the second-hand market, but also contributing to that mythos is the fact that Saga has never seen a re-release since that time, and there seem to be absolutely no plans to remake or remaster it. Now, there are reports that the original source code is being lost, which is a factor as to why it's never seen a re-release, but it has not stopped people hoping. So, if you don't want to spend hundreds, it is possible to play it without doing so. Saturn emulation is in a fine state nowadays, so you can find one of the Saturn emulators out there. If you have a Saturn yourself, you can mod it to be able to play a reproduction of the game. I should probably note that this is actually a reproduction of the game and not a legit one. And there are obvious hoops to jump through with those methods, and I appreciate not everyone is savvy to those kind of things. So it is a shame that it has to happen in order to play what is supposed to be a very good game. But, next question, I guess, what is this game about? Well, Saga tells the story of Edge. No, not that one. Edge is the member of a mercenary group. He's charged with protecting one of many excavation sites in this world. One day, monsters uncovered within the site immediately attacks his group. Edge manages to fend it off, and in doing so, finds a strange girl encased in stone within the cavern. Almost immediately afterwards, the group comes under attack again. this time by the Black Fleet, a group led by a man known as Crayman. The Black Fleet kill all of Edge's companions, leave him for dead, and fly off with the girl. Edge does manage to survive, however, thanks to a mysterious dragon that chooses him as his rider, and with the aid of the dragon, Edge swears revenge on Crayman. So, basic premise established, what are my expectations for the game? Aside from a little bit of footage from when I put together my 10 retro games I've wanted to play video a couple of months ago, I've mostly avoided looking too deeply into this game, knowing that it's one that I was going to play at some point and was quite excited to play. So if I'm being honest, I'm not sure what to expect from it. It being a late 90s era JRPG, I'm expecting some things typical of the genre at the time. There's going to be a few towns to explore, fairly biggish world, a handful of side quests dotted about, maybe some tough optional bosses, and I'm probably going to need to do a bit of grinding to get through the game. Difficulty-wise, I have heard from a friend who's played it that it's a little bit on the lower end of things difficulty-wise, so I find that quite interesting because when I've tried to play the original Panzer Dragoon games, I find them incredibly tough, although the Switch version of Panzer Dragoon did seem to be a little bit easier. So, like I say, I'm not 100% sure what to expect here, so let's just see how my first half hour or so went. The game is quite cutscene heavy at the start, so I'm actually going to talk about the first hour and a half of it instead of the first 30 minutes, and this comprises your opening cutscenes, the tutorial for the battle system, and the entirety of the first zone/dungeon. Now, plot-wise, the game does its best to hook you in right away. You get your opening, high-energy cutscene featuring Edge fighting the monster, discovering the girl, being attacked by Crayman, and the girl being taken away. It's all done really, really well. It looks really nice. The Saturn has a very unique visual style that you see throughout a lot of its games, and I will probably talk about this in a latter section, but the game itself seems to have a very unique style as well, which I was immediately on board with. Now, what we get is also a little bit of intrigue with another faction being introduced. This is the Empire, which seems to sort of rule over most of the land. Crayman has betrayed this Empire, and he's also destroyed one of their capital cities. The Empire presented as fairly sinister in their own right. They don't really seem to care about the fact that their capital city is being destroyed. They're more preoccupied with this mysterious tower that both they and Crayman are tracking down, and they dispatch their flagship to hunt him, and then we get into the proper game. Here we get a combat tutorial which walks you through all aspects of controlling and fighting with your dragon. You get taught your basic movement, your positioning, different types of attack, status effects, and so on. Now, I'm always wary of JRPG combat tutorials. Sometimes these games have a habit of overwhelming you with information, so whilst the stuff can be useful, I always wonder how long it'll be before I'd have to use certain aspects of it, and by that time would I have already have forgotten about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to briefly break down the combat system and how it works. It's not dissimilar to an active time battle system you get in the Final Fantasy games. Around this time, you have these 3 gauges that fill up over time. Spending a charge allows you to attack or use an item. Some attacks may use more than 1 gauge. What you can do as well is you can change your position to one of 4 quadrants around whatever it is you're fighting. Your position really matters, because moving to a particular quadrant might expose an enemy's weakness, offer additional protection, or even put you at a disadvantage. Again, feeding into that, while you are moving, your gauges do stop charging, so it's possible for you, and it's also possible for your enemies to move as well. So immediately, because of this movement and positioning, it's quite an engaging battle system. Additional depth is added via your attack type. You can attack with Edge's gun, which tends to be a single shot attack to an enemy. You can use the dragon lasers, which target multiple enemies or points on an enemy. Or you can use what's called a berserk attack, which I guess is kind of equivalent to magic attacks in other RPGs. These can cost multiple charges and also use a stat called BP to use, which I think is berserk points. After every battle, you're given a grading, ranking from close call through to excellent, and how you get graded depends on how much damage you take and how quickly you end the fight. Getting a higher rank actually nets you more XP and gives you an increased chance of getting items. In the hour and a half I played for this first dungeon, I had an absolute blast with this battle system throughout the entire opening zone. Despite the high encounter rate, I never tired of it. It was always so much fun trying to figure out how to get a better rank and finish fights as soon as possible and move around the enemies, finding out where the weak points are. It was just really engaging, really fun. And I do wonder, will it wear off over time, but just for this initial play, I had so much fun with it. Beyond the battle system, when you get to the main overworld, like flying about, the controls are generally fine, simple, intuitive. I had a few issues where the camera felt a bit off, but it wasn't detrimental. I didn't get stuck anywhere or anything. You can control Edge as well on land. He was generally okay. You don't get like the vertical movement that the dragon has, but your control's pretty much the same. But quite interestingly, the way you interact with the game world isn't quite the same as other RPGs or contemporary games. Instead of going up to an object or character and pressing an action button, the action button instead brings up a reticule. You hover that reticule over the thing you want to interact with, press the button again, and that brings up, it examines it, picks it up, or talks to the person. It's quite interesting way of doing things, reminds me a bit of a point and click style of play. But generally, I'm very happy with my first hour or so of the game. The first zone wrapped up with a really neat boss fight that made good use of the positioning mechanic and also allows you to defeat it by taking advantage of the environment as well. I just thought it was such a cool boss fight and a really good way of sort of tying together everything you had learned throughout that first zone. So let's push on and see what the rest of the game is like. So about 13 hours later, we are all done. Now, the first question, after a highly positive first impression of the game, did it remain as strong for me? Short answer, yes. Longer answer, well, let's get into it. The main thing I'll say is I really grew to love the game the more time I had with it, and in the end, I came out feeling very glad that I had this chance to experience it. It wasn't perfect. I had a few issues, which I guess we'll get into as we go through this section. So let's just start with the plot. Now, I'm just going to put it out there that if you are interested in playing the game and you don't want any of the plot spoiled for you, and I'm not going to go through the entire plot, but I am going to go through about the first half. So if you don't want to hear some key parts of it, skip ahead to the timestamp that comes up now. Sorted? Okay, it's the last chance. We're going to go into it. So the game started out as a fairly simple revenge plot. Of course, we had the intrigue about the tower, and anyone who's played any JRPG knows that, your initial opening is never going to remain like that by the end of it. Now, obviously in the opening scenes we were introduced to the strange girl, we learned about the tower, so things are going to get good. The first part of the game really concerns you getting to find out where Crayman is. You're not really concerned about the tower or anything else in this game world. You are introduced to a new character who you find coming out of the first area though. This is Gash. He's a member of a nomadic tribe of people known as Seekers. Your first area after this is a desert filled with really neat sandworms and underground caverns, and then you're guided to a caravan of other nomads, and they give you a somewhat frosty reception. They do, however, agree to help you after a certain amount of time. It's around here you have your first major encounter with Crayman's Black Fleet, and you are attacked by the girl from before. This first part's quite cool. You get introduced to the world map. It's not something as open as Final Fantasy VII or one of my other favourites, Wild Arms, is. Instead, each place you go to is represented by a node, and you just select which one you want to go to and you can go there. But there's still quite a few options open to you, and you can go back to most places you have already been to. It's through these opening bits and obviously the girl attacking you that you begin to realise that there is a lot more going on than Edge suspects or is really in it for. The subject of the tower keeps on coming up, and you do find a village left in ruins thanks to monsters, and you're wondering why the girl has attacked you. In the next part of the game, I did feel things got a little bit slower though. We go to our first and really only major town in the game, Zoa. You help a local man that says he can help you get to the tower, and you have to go to these ancient ruins known as Uru, where once again you're attacked by the girl. This time, whilst fighting, you both find yourself cut off from your dragons and you're forced to work together. And you end up going even deeper into these ruins. You find this underground sort of laboratory area. Edge learns more about the girl. She's called Azel. She was created by an ancient race in these ruins, and she doesn't want you going after Crayman. This takes us to about halfway through the game, and my main criticism at this point really was that I felt like the game was a little bit slow. I liked exploring the different maps, I liked fighting the enemies within these biomes. It wasn't necessarily challenging finding a way to progress. Each sort of area had like these little sort of mini, like, it was like solving a puzzle to get through, and it was fun, but I also did find some of the mechanics just a little bit slow at times. And what also didn't help is I didn't really find myself feeling much for any side characters or areas I was in. Around the halfway mark, there wasn't really anything in the way of side activities or quests, and just say for full disclosure, I did have a guide open for finding any side quests in case I missed anything super important that would be good to discuss, like any, side bosses. If I was going to play Final Fantasy VII, I'd want to talk about Ruby and Emerald Weapon and how to get to them or what they were like. So I kind of wanted to make sure if there were any experiences like that in the game, I covered them. The only real side quest there was finding these D units, which evolve your dragon. Anything else is kind of inconsequential. And not only that, some of them actually relied on you talking to the same person multiple times in order to trigger the quest, which, unless I had a guide, I would never have figured that out. Your mileage may vary on how important you find side quests or activities in a JRPG, but having been spoilt by other titles in the genre, I couldn't help but feel a little bit disappointed by this. But we are about halfway through the game, and it was around now that things really started to pick up. In the second half of the game, you will track down Crayman, you'll find a tower, you'll come into contact with the Empire, and you'll start to learn the full truth about everything that's been happening. It introduces a wide number of shades of grey to the story and develops the main character significantly, and I absolutely loved it. I won't go into any more detail from here, but I genuinely found the latter parts of the game to be so satisfying, and it picked up steam so much after the relatively slow second part of it. I cannot say any of it was bad, it was all engaging, but this second half, parts 3 and 4, were definitely superior, especially halfway through the third disc through the fourth. And when you get to the ending, I thought the ending was superbly done, and it made me appreciate the game just that little bit more. So, what about the rest of the game? So I gushed so much about the combat system earlier, my feelings didn't change. Simply put, one of the best combat systems I've encountered in a JRPG. Extremely engaging, random battles never felt like they were too much, satisfying to work out how to tackle an enemy and improve my rank for next time. Perhaps the only downside for some of you is you might find it a little bit too easy. I never felt like I was overly challenged by the game. I did die a handful of times, but it was quite easy to figure out where I went wrong, and it never felt unfair. There was certainly nothing akin to a Malboro-style enemy from Final Fantasy in this game. There wasn't really any bad boss fights, it was all very nicely balanced. Visually, I touched on this earlier with the whole unique style, it's dated a little bit. We're talking about the Sega Saturn game from 1998, of course it's dated a bit, but I thought it looked lovely. You can really see that they've pushed the Saturn to its limits through the variety of 3D environments on display, and this huge range of sort of biomes ranging from deserts, chasms, woodland, futuristic looking cityscape, well not cityscapes, but these underground tech labs, and areas out at sea. It's not just the environments that impressed me though, it was the general theme and style itself that I liked. It felt very unique and kind of weird. It made me think a little bit of Morrowind. It was kind of down to the way the enemies look, the city environment, and the general feel of the dragons. I'm not sure if there was a name for that style of art you'd see in this or Morrowind. If even this makes sense, but there's just a certain vibe. It's sort of a weird, insecty sort of melancholy to it, which, like I say, I don't know if there's a name for it, but I really liked it. It made it definitely stand out amongst other games of that era. And finally, we come to the audio. Quite unusual for a game of this era. Everything's voice acted. The opening was done in its own unique language before swapping to Japanese. The voice acting sounded good. I couldn't tell you if it was a good or bad performance because I don't understand the language, but nothing sounded bad. Soundtrack is absolutely gorgeous. Some of the themes are stuck in my head for days that followed, and after completing it, a friend actually pointed me towards an anniversary album of the soundtrack where things have been a little bit remixed and stuff, and that's absolutely fantastic, so I definitely recommend checking that out. So, we've gone through it. Let's wrap up the review with my final thoughts. My first thought is that it's really sad that so much of this game's legacy is now tied to how much it fetches on eBay, because it's a bloody fantastic game. No, it's not worth £600+, and I wouldn't really recommend anyone pay that much for it, because I don't think any game is worth £600. But the game is good, and it's absolutely worth making the effort to play it. If you happen to have Saturn available to you that you can play modded games on, or if you're able to get into emulation. It is a smart RPG that has some great ideas. It's got a fantastic combat system. It's got graphics that push the system to its very limits, a memorable soundtrack. It's a complete package of a game, and it is just gutting that so many won't play it due to the various hurdles in place. It is a must-play title that stands out as one of the best games on the Sega Saturn. So if you do have that opportunity, definitely check it out. The one thing I'd maybe say is don't go into it expecting something as wide and vast as Final Fantasy or some other JRPGs at the time, but Panzer Dragoon Saga stands unique and deserves more time in the spotlight. I really, really do hope that one day we will see it re-released properly on either a Sega Saturn Mini, or maybe a studio like Night Dive can work their magic to get it on a modern platform, because I genuinely feel more people need to play this game. So, conclusions. I bloody loved it. I really, really, really liked it. I was hyped to play it, and I was not disappointed by it, which just makes me incredibly happy, because I think sometimes when you go into these older games with a lot of hype, you can end up being disappointed, but this one absolutely didn't. So, with all of that said, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is a game that I've been wanting to tackle for quite some time, and as you can see, I'm incredibly enthusiastic about it. Please do leave a like and comment below with any thoughts you might have. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the alert bell to see any more videos I pop up about retro gaming and nerdy content. And until next time, thank you once again, and goodbye.